So you know how to set up a chessboard? Great! Well, now we need to learn how each of the different pieces is allowed to move. Let's clear the board. Let's start with the easy ones. A rook. And now let's put a rook on the board. Rooks move along ranks and files, and they can move more than one square at a time. So we could move this rook from e4 to h4. Or we could move it along the e file to e7. And now let's put a bishop on the board. Bishops move along diagonals, and they can move more than one square at a time. So we could move this bishop from e4 to h7. Or we could move it to c6. Did you notice that this bishop can only move to white squares? We call it a light squared bishop. At the start of the game, each player has two bishops, a light squared bishop and a dark squared bishop. The light squared bishop patrols all the white squares, and the dark squared bishop patrols all the black squares, so they work well together. Let's move on to the queen. A queen is a bit like a rook and a bishop put together. Let's have a look. Queens can move along ranks, files and diagonals, and they can move more than one square at a time. So we could move this queen from e4 to h7. Or we could move it to e1. The queen is a very powerful piece in your army. Let's move on to the king. Just like the queen, the king can move along ranks, files and diagonals, but the king can only move one square at a time. So we could move this king from e4 to f5. Or we could move it to e3. But even though your king is very slow, it is the most important piece in your army. If your king gets trapped, you lose the game. Can you remember which pieces we haven't looked at yet? The knight and the pawn. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten them. I just want to tell you a couple of important things first. Squares on a chessboard aren't very big. You are only allowed one piece on each square. Let's put a few pieces on the board and have a look how this works. Great! Let's have a look at what the white rook on e3 can do. The white bishop on b3 stops the white rook from moving all the way to the edge of the board. It can only move as far as c3 because it isn't allowed on the same square as the white bishop. The black bishop on e6 also stops the white rook from moving all the way to the edge of the board. But this time, the white rook is allowed to move to e6. The black bishop is an enemy piece, and the white rook can boot it off the board. We say the white rook takes the black bishop. This is good news for white. Now black has a smaller army. I've written the move down in the top left of the screen. Don't worry about that now. We'll learn more about that later. Time to look at the knight. How does a knight move? Let's put one on the board and find out. A knight goes 2 squares in one direction, along a rank or a file, and then it turns left or right and moves one more square. Let's look at the other possibilities. 2 squares to the left, 1 square down. 2 squares down, 1 square to the left. 2 squares down, 1 square to the right. 2 squares to the right, 1 square down. 2 squares to the right, 1 square up. 2 squares up, 1 square to the right. And finally 2 squares up, 1 square to the left. So this knight has 8 choices. One more thing about a knight. It's on a horse, so it can jump over pieces. The knight can't move to f6 now, because another white piece is already there. But it can jump over those other pieces to land on d6 and boot the black bishop off the board. And finally, let's look at the pawn. Let's put some pieces on the board and see what these little pawns can do. Pawns can only move forward. If the pawn hasn't moved yet, it can go forward 1 or 2 squares. But if a pawn has already moved, it can only go forward 1 square. Pawns capture enemy pieces by moving 1 square diagonally. But now this pawn is blocked by the black pawn. It can't take the black pawn because pawns take diagonally. And the black pawn is blocked by the white pawn. It can't move either. So that's it for now. In the next video, I'm going to show you 3 special moves that you need to know about.